Brian Griffey is a researcher at Amnesty International, and he now joins us via Skype from Washington. Brian, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Globe on SABC News. Now, Amnesty International has called on the United States to soften its stance and improve the conditions of displaced child migrants in the country. What type of challenges are these children facing?
Without their family members for no reason other than simply their migration status. And that flies in the face of not only U.S. law, but also international law. And what we saw just 2.5 weeks ago was a very cynical exercise on the part of President Trump in issuing this executive order, which was rather lawless in and of itself. It made no plans for the reunion of the children who've been separated from their parents, and indeed it was seeking to replace child separation from their parents, many of whom are asylum seekers, refugees in fact, with family detention, indefinite family detention, which is already unlawful in the U.S. So they're asking now for an exemption to that prohibition, as well as an extension of time to reunite the families they've been ordered to reunite, since they haven't made any efforts to do so far.
Now, Brian, let's speak about the separation of the children. How does this take place, and the impact, the psychological impact of these children, apart from their parents as well?
It's traumatizing for the parents and the children alike. And just recently, a number of weeks ago, a team of researchers and I were traversed the entire 2,000-mile border between the U.S. and Mexico in order to investigate these issues. We were meeting with parents in detention, and we heard in great detail the mechanics of how these separations took place. What really shocked the conscience about this was that it goes far beyond the policy that has been stated by the Trump administration. And in fact, they've separated many parents of their children, even when they were asylum seekers presenting formally and legally under U.S. law at official entry. So following that, it's clear that it's been used as a method of inflicting mental suffering on these people in order to compel them to either never come to begin with, or to give up their asylum claims and go back to their countries of origin, where many of them face persecution. So the anguish that we documented in this research, Amnesty International came out a number of weeks ago and said rose to the level of torture in the cases we documented, which now this goes back before the UN in terms of trying to recognize this flies in the face of these human rights commitments. They're not new commitments. Make no mistake, this is already unlawful under international law. Detention is never the best interests of the child. And the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture himself has already made reference to the fact that detention based strictly on migration status can rise in some cases to the level of torture, especially when being used in this fashion to compel people to give up their asylum claims.
Brian, do you have the exact figures or approximate figures with regards to the children that have been displaced?
Well, it's been difficult to get their hands on those figures, in part because the government has been unwilling to release them to organizations, including our own. However, they have put piecemeal figures together in their statements to the media, which have confirmed what we had already documented on the border, which is that beyond the 2,500 or so children who were separated from their parents recently, after crossing irregularly under the so-called zero-tolerance policy, there was an almost equal number, about 2,000 other children forcibly separated from their parents since the beginning of the Trump administration. The former official who oversaw the rare circumstances of family separations under the Obama administration recently confirmed that their separation of family members was extremely rare and the exception rather than the policy that we're seeing now under the Trump administration.
Now, Brian, with regards to the GCM, leaders of 193 UN member states met in New York from Monday and to agree on the final text of the Global Compact on Migration, that's the GCM. This is geared on dealing with, among other issues, the problem of migration and the problem of dealing with these issues that the U.S. is facing and the policy that has come up. Is Amnesty International expecting any outcome of this meeting with regards to the separation of children, the issues of migration? How should it be done? How do people get refugee status or asylum seekers get status in whatever country they come to?
Well, we would certainly hope this is an issue that's on the table, especially given that there's been so much international outrage, including from a number of heads of state with regard to this practice. Yet at the same time, we've seen political caution on the part of many governments who are treading carefully and not wanting to damage their bilateral relations. So in our view, a multilateral platform such as this negotiation is a perfect forum where that outrage can take shape into a recognition that these practices violate the fundamental human rights of families and children, as well as refugees, and that it invokes several varieties of international law, all of which it's violated. So right now, these are definitely topics that are in the fore, and it's at a moment to be more timely. Right now, just on World Refugee Day, about 2 weeks ago, the UN Human Rights Agency noted that the current levels of numbers of refugees worldwide are greater than any time documented in human history, at least since World War II, and apparently including 25 million refugees, around 65 million internally displaced people. This is a moment where these issues need to be addressed concretely, and this sort of abusive behavior that we're seeing in U.S. policies needs to be contained rather than replicated. It's also notable that on the same day those figures came out from the UN Refugee Agency on World Refugee Day on the 20th of June, that was the day of Trump's last executive order in which he basically was seeking indefinite detention of families seeking asylum at U.S. borders. So something has to be done, and a multi-platform seems like the right venue for nations to come together and put down.
Now, Brian, very quickly, just in wrapping up, you just mentioned the fact that when this executive order was signed, it was World Refugee Day, I think the 5th of June. Now, let's speak about the reunification of families, parents and their children. Has this taken place, and what's the process thus far? How long does it take for families to be reunited? So
Amnesty International here in the U.S., we have been documenting cases of this and interviewing separated family members since last November. And we've only seen it recently get traction, the so-called zero-tolerance policy. While a federal court issued an injunction requiring the government to expeditiously reunite all of these families and put them back together, the government has really dragged its heels. It was defiant immediately and said that it was going to go on with business as usual, separating families who present themselves lawfully at ports of entry, where they have humanitarian safety or security reasons, which is their own little loophole for when they're seeking to separate these people, even when they have proof of their family relationships and have done nothing wrong. That statement came out from the Border Protection Agency the very next day after the 20th executive order called Refugee Day by President Trump. Moreover, the Department of Homeland Security issued a fact sheet just a few days afterward saying that it basically confirming that it had no intention to reunite these family members unless and until they agreed to sign self-deportation papers and go back to their countries of origin where they had fled persecution in many cases. So now that the court injunction, we're coming up on the deadline, there's increased pressure on the authorities to reunite these family members, and they still have not done so and are now requesting an extension.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there for now. That was Brian Griffey, and he is a researcher with Amnesty International, and he joined us via Skype from Washington.